Welcome to Cure America. I'm Star Parker. And yes, we are on a roller coaster here in our country. Up, down, all around. I want to thank those of you that checked on me to make sure that I was okay here in Washington, D.C. over the last week. I heard from people I haven't heard from in years. It's kind of like, oh, wow, you live in L.A.? My goodness, so are you okay after an earthquake? And you find out, well, no, actually, I live an hour or so out of there. Or those of you that live in states to where one little tragedy way down in some corner happens, you hear from all of your friends and family. But this time it was up close and personal. I'm right up in it. And so I thank you and appreciate your well wishes to make sure that things were well. Are they well for our country, though? We don't know. And we don't know where we're going from here. But I have an important show for you, making sure that you can help sort through with us the noise of the news so that we can find some truth. That's what we do here on Cure America with Star Parker. I have some really important guests for you. Our panel, of course, will be here to help us sort through, but our important guests I think that you are going to really appreciate because Ken Cuccinelli, the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, is here with us. Mr. Mike Lindell from MyPillow, who you've seen up close and personal with the president, because we really need to end this moment while we're looking for, okay, Lord, what are you saying? We want to also not lose sight of what we have had for the last 4 years. President Trump made promises, and he kept promises. And we don't want to lose sight of some of those promises that were made and promises that were kept. There's a whole lot of frustration. Even those of you that are watching are probably saying, where do we go from here? So we're going to dive in right after an important moment so that you can get into this moment with us as we bring our nation to the moment that God wants us to experience, which is Christianity, capitalism, and a constitution for all. I'll be right back after this important message with my very special guest, Ken Cuccinelli.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. Right now, we're in Alaska unloading a hospital for COVID-19. But right now, our country is in trouble, and people are scared, people are afraid, and we see the violence and the injustices that are taking place. Only God can change this. This is a problem of the human heart, and we have sinned against God, and as a nation, we've turned our back on God. And I want you to know that God loves you, He cares for you, and He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. And if we'll confess them and repent, turn from them, and believe on His Son, Jesus Christ, God will forgive us and He'll heal our hearts. If you've never invited Christ into your heart, pray this prayer with me right now. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry, forgive me. I believe Jesus Christ is your Son. I want to trust Him as my Savior. I want to follow Him as Lord from this day forward forever. Amen. Call that number right now that's on the screen. We've got someone who will pray with you, talk with you, encourage you. God bless.
Welcome back, and you know that I do not want to get lost in all of this conversation, that promises were made and promises were kept by President Trump. And so I have a very unique and special guest, a very extremely special guest, Ken Cuccinelli. He is the acting deputy secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And what an opportunity for you to hear from him, because you know that the Capitol has been breached. You know that there's a lot of tension in Washington, D.C., and he has been in this position with the Trump administration that he will talk to you about. He also served as the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia and as a state senator there. He's an attorney. He has a lovely wife and 7 children. Thank you for being with us.
And the 2 grandchildren are the important part.
You get 2 grandchildren too? I have 2 grandchildren.
It's
wow.
the best.
They really, really are. And I think that with what has happened in our country, they come immediately to mind.
They do.
And especially as not only in Washington to try to solve some of the problems, but also with what has happened now with this breakdown in our institutions to where people are frustrated enough to want to pick up arms. But before we get to that breach at the Capitol and what we should be thinking about, tell us a little bit about the Homeland Security Department, what you're in charge of.
Well, it's over 250,000 people protecting America, whether it's the Secret Service or the 3 immigration agencies, Customs Border Protection, ICE, and USCIS, which is the legal immigration agency. Mm-hmm. We've got FEMA as well, and CISA, less well known. It's only 2 years old. They work with the private sector to protect our critical infrastructure, things like the energy grid, the internet, hospitals, the food supply, things along that nature.
And this was just in the 2 years, so was this an existing agency prior?
It was. It sort of got promoted to agency level on a bipartisan basis. President Trump signed that bill in 2018. There was no real controversy about it. They also helped secure the election, and particularly as we face off with foreign adversaries in that space. We have the Coast Guard, so we are a military branch. The Secretary of Homeland Security is a military secretary as well. And Transportation Security Agency, who everybody sees every time they go to the airport, TSA. So that's right. So we cover a lot of ground.
I think that's pretty much your beginning, though, because the Homeland Security happened after September 11th.
After 9/11.
And now you're fast forwarding us to another big headline was when FEMA went into Homeland Security, and now you're telling us a new agency is in there. I think most people just think about the border and the border protection.
Well, and that's been a major focus for the president. 450 miles of wall has been passed, which was what was promised, and that was very recent, just the last couple of weeks. And you know, a lot of people said that couldn't be done. Commissioner Mark Morgan over at CBP was the point person in the Department of Homeland Security to make that happen, along with the Army Corps. But none of it would have happened without the president pushing continuously. I mean, this is something that had been, frankly, most of the people in the Senate in 06 and 08 voted for this sort of thing, but they never did it.
That's right.
And in the House, and they never
did
it.
President Trump.
Yeah, and he ran on it, and he did it,
and
a lot of accompanying rules and regulations to try and bring the rule of law to the immigration space. We really have a long way to go yet, but we made a lot of progress in the direction that he promised we would.
Well, speak about that, because it was almost like his foresight was so immediate and so revolutionary, if you will, because then we dealt with COVID. So how did that help us get through that horrible moment of COVID?
Yeah, so COVID...
To not have others coming into our country.
You know, one of the things people don't know right now is we actually have what would be crisis level numbers coming to the border right now today. And that's been true for a number of months, but because of the public health order that covers the border, we are returning 85 to 90% of those folks coming across illegally in under 2 hours, which is just incredible. It's incredible, but it's only because of that order being in effect that we aren't stuck with literally thousands of people a day getting back to kind of numbers we saw last summer, which was tragic. It was a humanitarian crisis and a security crisis. And we worked our way out of that with a lot of creative tools and a lot of effort by the men and women on the front lines who do a heck of a job for America. But
and don't get much appreciation.
They don't get much appreciation. And then, as you said, along came COVID. And that introduces all sorts of new problems. People who are trafficked up to this country, they come in tractor trailers, they come through paths where they don't know the other people they're traveling with. Really perfect for the spread of a virus.
Right, well, that too, but even just the whole human trafficking area that you guys have specialized in. I want you to take a moment even to speak into that, because I don't know if people understand the depth of how critical it was that we secure that border and the types of things we were seeing there. And if you will speak into that first. And then also, we kept hearing about, these children that are just in a horrible state of affairs because of what was happening on the border. If you can speak into that a little bit.
Well, and we just finished some analysis over 6 years, put out a report about what happens to these people who come to the border, not just today and tomorrow, but over the span of years. And our system has failed to deal with children coming to the border. They're used as tickets to get into the country, and unless they're with families, typically not repatriated to their home country. Very frequently, maybe 5% or so of the children. And that situation, it tells the coyotes, the traffickers, what to do and how to do it. And they don't care about the outcomes for these folks. They just want to get their money and dump them on our side of the border. And that's not a good human condition. It's not good for the security of the country. It's also, the same pathways are used to bring drugs into the country, hard drugs, fentanyl, opioids, this sort of thing that are killing 70,000 Americans a year, something that this president has focused very hard on. And the seizures of drugs at the border have gone way up. We've seized in 4 years about the same amount they seized the 8 years before. And so a lot of focus on that to protect American communities. And as we like to say, every town in America is a border town, because what comes across that border ends up in your town. No matter where you're watching, this stuff is landing in your community, whether it be illegal immigrants or whether it be the drugs that are killing people in all of our communities.
One of the things I think gets lost in our discussions with the nation about what actually takes place here in Washington is the conviction of some that serve. And with you, it's a Christian, as a conservative. Was there any part of you that just knew to keep doing this even amidst the noise, because you knew that that benevolent charity community were in some of these communities that would help fill in that, what we call nonprofit, or some call the non-governmental agencies?
Yeah, they play a critical role, frankly, in just the humanitarian side of all this, because when you boil the immigration piece down, you're dealing with people. And we don't have a choice to not deal with them. And government can't solve every problem. Frankly, the nonprofits are stretched as well, but they're critical partners in our whole effort. We really need them to work hand in hand with us to avoid the kind of humanitarian crises we saw last summer and well, a year ago this summer, 2019. And that's been successful. It's sometimes a contentious relationship, because at the same time they're helping the people we have in our custody. They're suing us. They're suing us at the same time.
It's a balancing act for them, because
it is a balancing
if somebody
act.
shows up at your door, whether you're a church or Catholic Charities, you're going to help them as a person. But you're right. We have to kind of stay.
And we all have our limits.
Yes, that's true too.
Which is where the crises come from. Is when we get past those limits and we end up just releasing people into communities.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we don't want to get lost in the accomplishments of this administration, and that promise that was kept, because we were after our limits in this area. It was so chaotic that people were willing just to accept it as the status quo, as we knew that we had no border whatsoever, so we didn't have a country. I want to transition, though, because now we're in another type of crisis. The frustration after election 2020, November, has reached a point to where our Capitol was breached. This is another place that Homeland Security, maybe it wasn't on your calendar to have to deal with what happened in Washington last week.
Well, we were preparing for it. We had our Situation Room stood up a couple of days before, and we're interacting with our federal partners. Of course, the epicenter here was the Capitol. Everything that happened at the Ellipse was peaceful, 25,000 peaceful, no problems.
I walked through it. In fact, we were trying to get to the press room, and I kept saying, press, you want good press, you want good press. Well, you couldn't breathe. It was just like...
Yeah, it was pretty crowded. But again, that part was peaceful. People making their way down Constitution. We had a lot of people in the Reagan building. But again, with no problems. So you didn't hear about that because there were no problems. Things started to heat up at the Capitol. We got a call, service did, as well as DHS more generally. When I say service, I mean the Secret Service, to reinforce them, which we immediately responded to. We had several hundred officers
Did something spark it, or was this organized? There's so much decision.
Well,
we still have to
there are certainly, we're going to investigate all of it. FBI has the lead on that. In terms of the shooting that happened at the Capitol, the Washington Metro Police has the lead on that. There's some things we need to know. We need to understand how it transpired, how it happened, and how to avoid it happening again. Fundamentally, the Capitol Police were overwhelmed in numbers, and there were some people who were very determined to get in there. That's not your typical protester. I have to reflect back for 6 months or more than 6 months now, 7 months, the department has been dealing with this kind of violence all over the country. And we've had people...
But in this city, too.
Well, it was here, too.
Without a whole lot of help from the local government, because I have an apartment in this city, and I work in here full-time. And this has not been a good scene for the last 6 months. So I think
and that's part of what I want to say is that, we've had political folks, we've had a lot of media, as you know, who have sort of poo-pooed this kind of violence for 6 months. And, let's go back to George Floyd's killing. That shouldn't have happened.
That's right.
It shouldn't have happened.
That's right.
But neither should the violence that followed it.
That's right.
And both of those have to be dealt with separately.
Right.
We have to all condemn that violence, and everybody didn't do that.
Right.
There were people who were making excuses
That's
for that
exactly
violence,
right.
Both in the media and elected officials. Some of them who were very happy to have police protection
Right.
at the Capitol last week.
Oh, I bet.
It was only anecdotal, but I heard one of the cops was overheard saying, well, I think they like us now. And, funny thing about that.
Yeah,
and frankly, there are some people in the media who have reported on this stuff elsewhere, but now they were caught in a mob.
That's
They
right.
were scared to death.
They were scared to death.
And,
And we
their,
don't want that.
and their
We don't wanna go
reporting
with that.
reflects that.
Well,
but,
you know what?
But what we need to do is get together to all
Yes,
condemn
that's where I wanna
violence,
go.
left
Okay.
or right, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Violence is what matters.
That's
and,
right.
and maintaining the rule of law. Otherwise, we can't have these debates.
That's right.
And things do spin out of control.
That's right. And see if we can civilly disagree again.
That's
and
right.
that's what, we have elections for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, and we battle
right.
in that voting booth. And so I want to transition into Ken Cuccinelli, because Attorney General, Secretary, State Senator, many have eyed you for presidential and other political places. What are you thinking about now that
I'm thinking about getting to the private sector.
No,
and
come
hey,
on.
look, that's
Okay,
what I
for
got to
5
do.
minutes, right? For what?
So I'm going to continue doing crisis work, but on the
Okay.
private side, and do
Okay.
the kind of management support that I've done in the federal government and elsewhere. I've had great success at that, and I'm going to just carry it out to the private sector. And I'll support candidates and do those kinds of things, but I don't have any immediate plans.
No
on
immediate
that
plans,
front.
but you will be engaged, because one of the things that we don't want to get lost, I would assume, is those that are conservative is the conservative part of Republican, if you will,
Right.
because right now we're breaking down. We saw your state of Virginia go blue. We just saw Georgia go blue. California's gone blue a long time ago, my home state, but we're trending back purple because when you go too far to the bottom, you start going back up.
Yeah.
So you won't stay too far out of politics, will you?
Oh no, I'll be engaged as much as my work allows me to do that,
Okay.
and it's not far from my heart, and I'm a
Okay.
big constitutional
Yes, you are.
conservative,
Yes.
believe in faith and protection of it, and I certainly expect to keep working for those kinds of principles going forward.
I love it. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Hey, good to be with you all
God
the time.
bless you and what that you're doing. And God bless you. But I'm going to be right back with my panel. We're going to talk a little bit more into the questions that we just laid out on the table right after this message. Our special guest, Ken Cuccinelli, the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, at least calmed your nerves a little bit that Washington, D.C. will be fine. We will, as a nation, get through this together. What I don't want to get lost in the debate is that the president came in with promises. President Trump had promises that he made and promises that he kept, and we don't want that to get lost in a whole lot of what has happened at the U.S. Capitol last week, as we all know. So with me are my special panelists. We're going to sort through that. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the future and what we should be thinking about there, but in particular, the promises made and promises kept. So I have Dr. William Allen with us, our Chief Operating Officer for the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. I have Richard Manning again, co-author of Necessary Noise. I don't think we were expecting this kind of noise, but Necessary Noise, as well as the president of Americans for Limited Government. And I have a very special guest from the Heritage Foundation who you've gotten to know because they send us over their experts. And this expert in particular is Mr. Mike Howell. Thank you. You're a senior advisor for the executive branch at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for being here with us. But you know what's interesting? I like that you're here and you're in the hot seat first because you also have experience in the Department of Homeland Security. And you know, what's really fascinating is when Homeland Security was first a concept because of September 11th, a whole lot of people didn't want the role of government. And what we heard from Ken Cuccinelli is not only is it necessary, but now it's starting to organize our safety and security from border issues to FEMA issues, and so we need all of that. But you guys got called in, or they got called in, because the Capitol was breached and it just didn't seem prepared. Tell us a little bit about that before we get to some of the other topics we want to talk about. The Capitol Police, what happened?
Right. So the Capitol Police is its own sovereign police force. It's, in the legislative branch. It's accountable to Speaker Pelosi and, Mitch McConnell. It's separate and distinct from the Washington, D.C. police, the federal, FBI, and Department of Homeland Security. So they have about 1,000+ member police force. And what we saw was really inexcusable. The perimeter was breached. They were ill prepared. We saw videos of the barriers being opened up and people let in. So what happened? There will be a review. There will be accountability. People are already calling for firings. And, I hope that the Capitol Police reach out to, their law enforcement counterparts of the Department of Homeland Security, like the Secret Service. The Secret Service, as you remember, did an expert job of guarding the White House this summer during some of the very dangerous riots that occurred out there.
Crazy riots. We were over there, especially the night of the convention, and all of that got out. Oh, my.
Can you imagine if they had let folks in past the gates like they did on the Capitol Police?
Yeah.
It would have been just the same display we saw at the Capitol, but way worse in the White House. So they should be asked for their expertise and to weigh in on how to protect that perimeter of the Capitol. It's inexcusable what happened.
It was inexcusable, but Richard, I'm wondering, did they not expect to be more prepared, because the MAGAites are usually very peaceful protesters? What happened and what should happen next?
Well, first of all, I don't know why they were not prepared. What I do know is that there appeared to be almost waving people in, and it's absurd. I can't imagine that. But we have to have a universal kind of agreement that we're not going to have violence. We're not going to, either side. Antifa needs to be denounced by Speaker Pelosi, and we all need to denounce anybody who wants to engage in violence. At that point, we can have a common ground, have a discussion about where our country goes. But the fact of the matter is, unless we tell people that violence is not the alternative, then we have nowhere to start a conversation to be able to figure out the rest of this.
Yeah, in a unified voice, and the left just can't bring themselves to ever say, I'm sorry. And you see the right, Dr. Allen, saying it immediately every time. There is more of a consistency. But I tell you, people are nervous right now to see that's happening in our country, that we could really break down. You did an incredible piece in blackcommunitynews.com that talked about what we have to look forward to in governing when you don't have a consensus in the population. 75 million people did vote against, the people that are not only getting ready to take up power, but also did not denounce violence, as these gentlemen were telling us that happened over the last 6 months here in the nation's capital and all across the country. Could you tell us a little bit about what you were seeing in that, a profound column?
Well, I think the thing to remember is that people are content to lose an election so long as they think they've had a fair shot, just as they're content to lose at trial so long as they've had their day in court. And so it is not having lost that has caused the problems that we're living through. And I would almost want to state what Richard said in the opposite fashion. Once you've condoned violence, you've invited violence. And you start a cycle. And we're in that cycle because earlier this year, violence was condoned. We've seen the evidence from this in the Portland mayor, who now says finally, well, I'm not going to condone it anymore, I'm going to stop. Well, guess what? You have collected the kindle that feeds the fire. It's not so easy to stop as it is to begin. So we're in a position where we have to ask ourselves, who can possibly bring the country back together with a resolute denunciation of violence of every stripe, and at the same time, and this is the most important part, who can actually hear what everyone else is saying. For no one can speak to the need of the country who can't hear everyone else. If we only hear our own parties, if we only hear our own adherents, we are not participating in a dialogue.
Well, we're not, but I'm wondering, Mike, I'm going to come back over to you. If that dialogue is even possible. I mean, you can sit there and listen to somebody of a worldview that's inconsistent with yours and you're never going to adopt. I am not going to change my Christianity based on a liberal conversation I may have had. So is there a way that we can disagree civilly? Are we at that place in our country to where there's going to be a demand that we have all of us just together in some type of peace treaty, or are we going to see those tensions arise between the two extremes, or are the elected officials going to stand up at this moment and actually figure out how to sort through and govern these two distinct groups and their desires?
I certainly hope so. I think it's important, though, to remember that 4 years ago in the inauguration of Donald Trump, this was born in violence. They rioted in D.C. They burned down D.C.
That's right.
The rhetoric that was coming out that was encouraging some of the reckless behavior and property damage was echoed by the media, encouraged by the media, mainstreamed by the media. We saw Maxine Waters saying go and confront people. We saw Trump administration officials chased out of restaurants. We saw people wearing MAGA hats beaten on the streets. Right. So there is a long history. And I think this country needs to take a full accounting of how the media and elected officials incited it, encouraged it, and then ultimately capitalized on it through electoral victories. The country was driven into a tailspin by demagogues, and it was mainstreamed by the media. Just because now that we've arrived at a new place in time, I don't expect all of that to go away. We're going to see extreme leftist power grabs. They're going to use what happened on the Capitol as a justification for all sorts of things. Whether they're gun grabs, whether it's any sort of federal invasion into private life and your constitutional rights. We're going to see amnesty for illegal aliens. All of these things are not going to heal the country. The country needs time to come together and heal. Instead, they're going to use the power they got into because of violence and extremism to drive further discord to achieve their political objectives. So while I encourage all conservatives to avoid, violence and everything, I don't know how this is going to get better.
You know why that tension was there, exactly. And some are saying that we're not even sure that there were all MAGAites in there, that there were people that have snuck in. In fact, when we went over, blackcommunitynews.com went over to the rally last week to get inside of what was going on there with the ralliers, Black Lives Matter's plaza was empty. So the people needed to be somewhere, and some of the different groups we saw were suspect, should we say, and especially as we walked through and almost got high because of the marijuana. This was not the normal MAGA rallies that we've grown accustomed to. So we all kind of sensed that something was going wrong. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because Richard, to be sent home and just say, well, now it's all your fault, that what has been happening over the last 4 years, we've all experienced it, and now it's all your fault, so you guys just need to sit in your corner and take what we're getting ready to offer for the next 4 years. Are the MAGAites going to do that, or are we really at that critical point that we mentioned in Necessary Noise that we could be peaking another civil war?
First of all, I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to take a Christian attitude towards it. Okay. We're taught to turn the other cheek. We're taught to we're really taught to be the people who Christ would have us be. Right. And violence begets violence.
Yes, it does.
We have to understand that. We have to reject that. What we have to embrace is this is an opportunity for us to stand for principle, to resist extremism, to resist a Marxist takeover of our government, resist the impulse to try to make it so our churches can't meet, so we can't worship our God as we choose. We have to resist those impulses, but we don't have to do so in such a way that we are seen as being weak.
That's right.
We can be meek, but we cannot be weak.
That's right. And there are places to do that. Thank you. Because, Dr. Allen, we've talked about it even on previous shows. 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, we get an opportunity. The way that the founders brilliantly designed the country, the states have a role in this. We battle in the voting booth. Is this a time for us to be that vigilant, to just take over those structures that are to have us live in a rule of law and push aside those that want that tension? Or should we just kind of be quiet and see if the tensions get hot enough to where they both go out there and keep us all locked down forever and we kill each other?
I don't think there's a quiet left for us, unhappily. These are sad times. Not angry times, sad times. Because I think the divisions are going to get worse before they get better. Wow. I don't think that the normal rotation of elections are going to answer to the need. The needs are greater than that right now. You have a president who is going to become so universally discarded that you can hardly make reference to him. You will see this in just a few weeks. Right. It's going to be next to impossible to have a discussion without beginning it by saying, I condemn President Trump. Right. That's just the tenor of the time.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's why after our special guest to interview, I want us to next talk about that, because we don't want him to get lost. He made promises and he kept those promises. So that's what we're going to talk about on the other side of this break when we process. As we process together that has happened to our country in this critical moment that we've been called into. So I want to keep my guests, keep you. Right after this, we'll have another discussion.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. Right now, we're in Alaska unloading a hospital for COVID-19. But right now, our country is in trouble, and people are scared, people are afraid, and we see the violence and the injustices that are taking place. Only God can change this. This is a problem of the human heart. And we have sinned against God, and as a nation, we've turned our back on God. And I want you to know that God loves you, He cares for you, and He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. And if we'll confess them and repent, turn from them, and believe on His Son, Jesus Christ, God will forgive us and He'll heal our hearts. If you have never invited Christ into your heart, pray this prayer with me right now. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry, forgive me. I believe Jesus Christ is your Son. I want to trust Him as my Savior. I want to follow Him as Lord from this day forward forever. Amen. Call that number right now that's on the screen. We've got someone who will pray with you, talk with you, encourage you. God bless.
Another special guest I have for you, you probably recognize Mr. Mike Lindell, MyPillow man, you may know him as, but you might also know him as a major supporter of the President Donald Trump, and he can attest to some of the promises that were made and the promises that were kept. Mike, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What they might not know is your testimony and how you got to the place to where almost every time they saw the president making an appearance, you were right there.
Right.
It's like his lieutenant, his armor bearer. Yeah, you just penned your autobiography. Maybe in 5 minutes you can tell us about it.
Well, you know, I come from a place of, my parents divorced when I was 7, so I ended up being from the only kid in the school from a broken family. And that manifested into, not fitting in, fear of rejection and all this, and which manifested into drug addiction. I got into cocaine, then crack cocaine, but I was a very functioning addict. Most addicts, our people think most are, homeless in the streets. No, I've eaten with everything from 0 forks to 4 forks, and everything in between. Functioning addicts, addiction is, everywhere. And then,
it's hiding a lot of pain.
It's hiding pain. It's false courage. It masks pain. Hides deep down. You don't have a foundation. I didn't have the Lord then. I had good seeds planted, but then by the grace of God, on January 16, 2009, I quit all the addictions overnight. God freed me of the desire, but I wasn't saved. He just freed me of the desire. But that was, but from that time I woke up that morning and I'm going, wow, something's different. It's gone. Oh, wow. And, and I had things happen. Part of my story is, I had drug dealers do an intervention on me. That's kind of a famous story.
They loved you. They were trying to help you because they wanted you to stay their client.
That's not what they wanted. This was different. I came out of the room. It was downtown Minneapolis, and I had been up for like 2 weeks, 14 days, and they're all three standing there, the biggest dealers, and they're going, we're cutting you off. You've been up 14 days. And I said, what is this, an intervention? They said, call it what you will, Mike. Right. Now, 2 of them left. One of them went down the streets, I found out later, and to get the word out. Well, this guy finally fell asleep, and I was already crack farming on the carpet farming, and I was scraping my pipe, and I went down to the streets after he fell asleep at 2:30 in the morning. I couldn't get crack anywhere. I couldn't. Nobody would sell me. No, I'm not selling.
It's kind of like the gambling world where they say, look, we know that he has a problem, and we don't want to be a part of it, so we're going to send through the industry that nobody's serving anymore.
Well, I couldn't believe it. I came back upstairs, and here's what he said to me. He goes, he said, how'd that work out for you? He goes, you've been telling us for years that this pillow thing is just a platform for God, and you're going to come back and help us all get out of this addiction world we're in. So I've started the Lindell Recovery Network. 2 of them that were there that night are born-again Christians that work for me, and it's just, it's been great to see this platform.
So good.
That God gave me this big platform, and then the
and gave you the vision for MyPillow Man. I know that we're saying it very rapidly because we don't have a lot of time, but you wrote the book. What are the odds from crack addict to
CEO, yeah.
So people want the details. You can get those
absolutely.
details because
so many details.
Because it's a fascinating story. You have this idea of MyPillow Man. You had drug sellers saying, "You promised us you're going to do that MyPillow Man so that you can come and help us get out of the hood."
Right.
And God then delivered He delivered you to His salvation.
Right, yeah.
And then you got a phone call from the President of the United States.
Well,
but he wasn't the president then.
He wasn't the president then. You know, and that when I got freed of all the addiction, there was still, you know, I always wear my cross on TV, but and I wanted to have that personal relationship with Jesus. But you know what? Then these things started happening that could only be of God.
Right.
And that was one of them was in the summer of 2016. Donald Trump reached out to me. He said, "Mike, could you meet me in Trump Tower in New York City?" And I had seen that in a vision, but long before, and I'm going, why would I want to meet Donald Trump? Then he ran for president. And I walked into his office that day. They said, "Oh, you're not going to meet him alone, and whatever you do, don't tell him you were a crack addict, right?" Well, things happened right as I walked in the door, and I was alone. I walked in, and he goes, "Mike, you always wear your cross. Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yes, Mr. Trump, and this is a really divine appointment." But I started talking, it was like just talking to you. It was just so easy. And I said, you know, he's telling me I want to bring jobs back and like MyPillow, made in the USA. And I said, you know, Mr. Trump, I said, I was a crack cocaine addict. I kind of looked at him.
After you were told not to tell him.
I said, I want to help millions get out of addiction. I want to help them get out of addiction, and I'm going to have this big platform as foundation. And he said, you know what, I'm going to stop the drugs pouring in. And it was just a businessman. I go, wow, such a great guy, and common sense solutions, or problem solution, and he knew what it was going to manifest to. So
I think it was more than that, because even in how the handlers and the politicals always say, don't mention this, don't do that. Yeah. But the fact that you did, remember, he as a person, he had this in his own family. His brother had problems.
Yeah.
So he identified
his brother,
with you and your story.
We both, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
You know.
That's why we don't want to try to interject ourselves and other people in the divine. Like you said, you saw that moment.
Yeah, I just put it out there, and he liked that.
Wow.
He liked that.
Wow.
We both liked that. But I walked out of his office. I go, he's going to be the greatest president ever if he's with what the man I just seen. It was this. I read him, and he had no agenda other than to help people. He cared about what I said and to help the country. But I went to his employees. This was real important. I said, I got to validate this, because I do my own due diligence. I went to his employees, talked to them. Every one of them that I talked to said he's a great leader, great boss, great person, and he had done something for them personally. They had a personal story.
Wow.
You know, that's pretty amazing. So, of course, I got back to Minnesota and wanted to tell the media and tell the world, and whoa, all of a sudden I was just attacked, called a racist, called everything you could imagine. I'm going, what did I do? I didn't even tell you what we talked about yet.
Yeah, it's interesting how racism is thrown out to shut down any and all dialogue. You know, it's kind of now become like the N-word. Once it happens, it's never mind anything else. But we're not going to have a lot of time. But what we do know, what we don't want to get lost in some of the discussion that's happened over the last week because of the breach of the Capitol, is that President Trump did make promises, and he kept most of them. So speak into where we are now, the frustration that happened as a result of an election that has a lot of problems that needs to be investigated.
Well, there's, you speak of the election. There was a miracle on the election night, 11/15, because this great country, this great president, all these votes came in that they didn't expect. It broke the machines. I know this. I've been helping Sydney, and I've been helping General Flynn. I've dug in and seen my own. I look at deviations all day long. You know that. And I looked at it all, and they didn't make sense. So I know it's all there, and it's what it's going to do when it is finally. Sooner or later, people got to look at it. When they do, it's going to change. It's going to change our world forever to fair elections. Go back to paper, because that's the best technology. But the evil's going to.
States will decide, but I think that
the evil's going to get revealed.
It will be revealed. And the model that they adopt in the different states, because we do love federalism, will be for the people. So I think that it's a healthy moment for this to be exposed.
And when that happens, it's going to be a uniter. Okay, you have the media. I know this firsthand. Like I just told you, I was called a racist. I grew up and spent a lot of time in downtown Minneapolis. I'm as far from a racist as anyone on the planet. And my friends all stuck up for me. They're going, what? You know, and so I've had it happen to me firsthand, and they can't get me going backwards. I've already told it all.
So this is a good moment for you to speak into the breach at the Capitol. You called for this moment. You stood next to the president throughout his presidency. The frustration, the anger, the fear, the wanting to just hit that wall or go back to the yesterday. That's not Christianity. So where do we go from here? Will we be able to reconcile ourselves in this moment, reach deeper for those things that we're supposed to do with this hard and stirring and tragic time, and recover ourselves to be better?
I believe that we're in the time, this is a miracle that we've been in, that we're living in this time because of what happened on election night, and because it's not just what Donald Trump did, his promises kept, promise made, promise kept. This is what God, this happened. All this is going to be revealed in our country. I believe we're in that. People don't look for hope unless something bad's going on. And that hope is Jesus. So I believe this is the seeds for the biggest revival in history. I really believe that people don't pray when things are all great, and they don't, right now everybody's praying, and everybody out there needs to pray, and people are going to come closer to God, closer to God, and people are going to find God because He is that foundation. Look at me. I'm a living example where I was so down and out. I tried all kinds of different things, and finally that answer was God,
That's right.
And that's it.
Well, that is it. And what a beautiful way to end this particular segment with my special guest, Mike Lindell. Thank you for being here with us on Pure America with Star Parker. And I'll be back after this message with the panel, and we'll assess some of the things you just heard right after this. Well, if you're like a lot of people that hear from Mike Lindell, you would think, woo, I could not only stay on that roller coaster, but I could stay all day. He's a very, very special person, a very dear friend, and that book, you want to get that if you have time to read through his personal story and find out why he has so much passion. Now he's left that passion on the table for my panel to sort through some of it, including the promises that were made, the promises that were kept, so that we do not lose that and lose sight of that, to encourage that passion that brought these changes so that we can continue some of those changes, even though, as Dr. Allen said, it's going to get pretty dark and pretty rapidly here in Washington and across the country. So my panelists stayed with me. So I have Mike Howell from Heritage Foundation, the executive branch over there. Thank you. You're one of the senior advisors. Brought a lot of expertise with him from the Homeland Security Department, and so we're having a good time with him, including between the break. He's telling me a little bit about why he got out of Washington, D.C. with his wife and their little expecting baby, because it's just no longer a place to raise family. And that's just not going to work for our country if everybody always has to move every time and get smaller and smaller. So we have to fight, which is what you're saying, Richard. We're not going to battle in the streets, but Richard is right. We're going to stay engaged. And so thank you for staying with me. Richard, a co-author of Necessary Noise, as well as the president of Americans for Limited Government, and then Dr. Allen. Dr. Allen is the chief operating officer at the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, but he's also a political scientist, and he's wrote an incredible piece that was published in blackcommunitynews.com, and I want to talk to him about that a little bit. But I'm going to start with Mike, because Mike, the president did make a lot of promises, and so even though the tension from last week and the breach last week and the frustration last week, and as you said, this was a build-up of the last 4 years of President Trump being called an illegitimate president. They've never given him one moment to sleep, but he did accomplish so much. Speaking to a couple of those things that we don't want to get lost, and then maybe we can even look at, Richard, you'll look at then which ones in particular we should make sure don't get lost. But we know that Israel's different. We know that the courts are different. We know that even pro-life is different. Tell us a little bit about your sense of hold on to the good, even while we're walking through this bad moment.
Absolutely. So as President Trump, in the face of just unprecedented obstruction for both legitimate from people on the Hill in the legislative process, but also, behind the scenes, things like people in the administration thwarting things he was trying to accomplish, who weren't on the same page with the agenda, with the media, and all the anger out in the country. Despite all of that, Trump was still able to push forward a ton. Now, we can go right down the list. As you mentioned, judges. No one has done what he did for judges. Right. I mean, conservatives can talk about that forever. 3 on the Supreme Court, hundreds on the lower courts. We're going to be seeing that for generations. That's perhaps one of his largest gifts. Now, when we talk about immigration, that's an issue I think is, most important to me because it affects every single other issue. Yeah. It is the left's biggest dream to change how we do it, and we're very anxiously watching that because they want to flood the country with more illegal aliens to give amnesty.
Oh, yeah. Secretary Cuccinelli walked us through a little bit about how sensitive that is. A lot was accomplished, but there's still quite a bit of work left to do. So you're right. We don't want to lose sight of those accomplishments. Go ahead.
And President Trump has made it all the more difficult for them to do that because I think he's changed the paradigm in how people think about immigration. Before and post 9/11, it was strongly thought of solely as a border security issue. Now it's being tied to issues such as, our labor force, our culture, and also American sovereignty. And I think Trump raised the consciousness of that issue to such a level that Americans are really read into it, know what's happening in D.C. and how important these decisions are, and won't stand for what the left's trying to do. Trump was able to slow the rates into the country, both illegal and legal, and stand up for the American worker in a way that they're not just going to be able to turn right back on without people being wiser for what they're up to. And I think President Trump's owed tremendous credit for that.
He does, and I didn't mean to try to interrupt you, but I think my sense is that, yeah, you're right, and the people should stay engaged, but Richard, where are they going to stay engaged? Georgia just went, so now we're talking about a House, divided House, and very limited power over Nancy Pelosi's House, but a House, a Senate, divided Senate, one little vote different Senate, that Kamala Harris makes a difference, and a White House. So where are the people going to navigate to be able to say, oh, no, you're not going to turn around in these, at least this particular area, because the judges, they won't be able to remove. They can expand, but they won't be able to remove. But they certainly can try to push back on a lot of the changes in immigration policy.
Right. Well, there's a couple places where they can go. First of all, we have state and local governments, which have a lot of power and actually expanded their power due to Democrat lawsuits against the Trump administration. So when it comes to immigration, for instance, the Supreme Court held that you could not punish a city or state for engaging in sanctuary city policy. You could not deny them law enforcement dollars. Well, if you apply that, they can't, then also the federal government should not be able to deny you education dollars if you refuse to use the federal curriculum. And you go back to an actual curriculum that is based on American exceptionalism and telling the truth about our history. Wow. So you can do that and use the Supreme Court precedent that they set to defend the ability to make certain that your children are hearing the true story about America. They're learning to read and write. They're doing all those things that we used to take for granted that our education system is failing to do right now.
Oh, sounds like not only did President Trump do unprecedented things like to help us learn about the process of voting and engaging in our government, but now it's done tremendously for states' rights and allowing us to go back to where we should locally control anyway.
Not by his willing to do it, but the fact is the left's obsession with attacking everything that was Donald Trump created Supreme Court precedents in a couple of different areas that opened the door for being able to resist peacefully and lawfully. Right. And so I say, state and local levels where the battle is going to be, particularly if you live in West Virginia, because then you got Manchin to beat up on the federal level.
Wow, that's interesting, and it's serendipitous, because that's what we want, is to not lose sight that there is an invisible hand, and we want that. And Dr. Allen, in your piece, you talked about this governing. Will Biden be able to govern with half the country or not with him? How will this look, or are we going to just go into a totalitarian state?
I don't think we're going into a totalitarian state, but I don't think we'll be able to say with real strong confidence that the people are in charge. So there's a distance between saying that and saying totalitarian state. So government is going to have to impose upon us, because it can't work its will through our wills. It will have to impose its will. And I think that's what we can look forward to. And I think the context is one in which we need to be candid, and say to ourselves, we don't really have much of an option other than persisting in the conversation that Richard has been describing and others have described, that the people are more important than the government. Mm-hmm. I would repeat that. The people are more important than the government. Mm-hmm. Yes, the White House is important and sacred. Yes, the Capitol is important and sacred, but they are not idols that we worship.
That's right.
It is the people's power. It's self-government that counts.
Right.
One of the things that I appreciate, having observed last week, is how nearly universally elected officials, Republicans, in D.C. and outside, universally and in the strongest languages, condemned what took place there. It was an unprecedented display in recent times because we haven't seen people stand up and say to their supposed allies, we condemn you, the way they did this past week. That's something to build on. We can say we have nothing to apologize for. We don't tolerate those kinds of things.
Well, let me ask you something, because in that same piece you talked about this not being it's a historic moment, but it's not a new moment, because you said that there were similar tensions in the election of 1960. I don't know that many can appreciate that, and it might be something we want to discuss and people to dust off their history.
It is certainly important to remember that the 1960 election was essentially stolen in Chicago and Texas by vote manufacturing, voter manipulation. And what's important, of course, is after it was stolen, the sitting vice president, who had been the candidate for president, presided over the Senate that nevertheless said, we will inaugurate the candidate who was the beneficiary of this theft, so that we can sustain this constitutional order. And that was important in that moment, and it is still important now. Having had an election stolen doesn't mean you've lost democracy. Abandoning faith in elections does mean the loss of democracy, so that we can work to have a better future.
Right, by revisiting, as you're saying, Richard, the states, because not only are we going to go into the states as a battle for our children's future, battle for flexibility on where we live and housing policy, we're going to see that change rapidly. I mean, there are many areas, immigration, as was mentioned already, we're going to see some things that locally we need to be on top of, but elections as well. You know, if election integrity is not restored, then we're going to see more of the type of violence that we saw last week at the Capitol. There's just no way that you're going to keep a free people from wanting freedom.
If people don't believe that their ballot matters, then there's no valve to lift off the pressure. And I would argue that the Supreme Court's failure to deal with those cases, one way or the other, helped keep the pressure on, and
that's what
just like a pressure cooker sitting there.
Took it up.
And by virtue of what happened was, because there was no valve to release the pressure, we had what happened. The reality is, though, we're all responsible for our own actions.
That's right.
And the temptation is to try to blame others for the actions of a few. And if we believe that people are responsible for their own actions, then the people who were responsible are the people who breached the Capitol. And ultimately, there were 1 million people on that mall, and a few engaged in irresponsible behavior. It does not mean that the 1 million people who are on that mall should be dismissed because a few misbehaved. That would be akin to saying that the people who come to the mall and all sorts of different left-wing marches who leave trash everywhere should all be condemned as anti-environmentalists who are destroying the environment just because some people didn't pick up their garbage.
Right. Yeah, that's true, and that's why I think this moment that Dr. Allen spoke about, the 1960s, is similar tension. I mean, where not only did we have then Kennedy put in as the president in a stolen election, we saw what happened as a result of that. Things didn't get better. People were disenfranchised, and we ended up in a very horrible place as a nation throughout those 60s. So I guess my question then back to you, Mike, is are we going to recover? I mean, where do we go from here? Are we dealing with a crisis of the faith, a crisis of faith in our founding principles? And if we are, then, is it recoverable? Can we get reassured that we can move to the point of voter integrity to where we can trust our institutions? Or is it broken down to the place that everything will need to be rebuilt?
Well, I think unfortunately we are at a bit of a crisis point. We unfortunately are not one American people right now. We kind of exist as two polar extremes.
And we can pretend it all day, and you keep hearing people, I want unity, come on, can we get along? We can't.
Right.
It's over, guys. We're exactly at that point. So please,
we
tell
don't
us.
have a shared culture, a
That's
language, a history, a shared common experience.
That's right.
People watch all different television channels, cater to their own interests. They all don't get together on Sunday and go to church anymore.
Nope.
We aren't doing things together as a country because we're fundamentally a different people.
Wow.
And it's not going to help when we open the borders and add more people and don't allow to assimilate our culture to all come together and heal as a country. And I feel like that's a fundamental difference between now and 1960 for all the problems that it had. Back then, at least people, shared a lot more in common in terms of
Culture.
their culture and their history than we do now.
Right.
And so I'm very
pluribus
worried
unum.
where we are.
Yeah,
And the
we
problem
wanted it.
is that the left is going to use what happened on the Capitol, as disgraceful as it was, as a pretext to say all concerns about our voting systems are illegitimate, and if you say they're illegitimate, then you share with those conspiracy theorists and crazy wackos.
Yeah.
So what they're going to do is they're going to regularize this ballot harvesting and vote by home. It'll soon be vote by iPhone. And if you disagree, you're a crazy who stormed the Capitol. They're going to seek to add states to permanently upset the balance of the Senate, seek to add judges to permanently upset the court, and the filibuster so they're able to ram through whatever. And then there's no longer a way for people who are concerned to participate in their democracy because their voice will have been so watered down.
Right.
And add on to that millions of new illegal aliens getting amnesty voting.
Right.
So their voices are going to be.
Yeah, and these are real legitimate concerns, Doctor. So you talked about, diving in, that we're going to have to sort through some of this and say, you've got to have your people with you.
Yes.
You've got to be able to govern a nation of people. But that frustration level and that divide is so deep now that it will be unacceptable, some of the description of what Mike just said, for the people that are now being forced to adhere to them. What would they do?
Well, I think the problem is not so much that we are a divided culture. Mm-hmm. I know there are signs of cultural tension, but I don't think we're a divided culture. I think it's more radical than that. I think we've been cut off from our past. I'll illustrate it for you. The president-elect gave a lovely speech last week condemning the violence, an appropriate speech condemning the violence. But in it, there was a poison pill that most people didn't observe. He tried to use the authority of Abraham Lincoln to intensify his remarks. So he quoted Lincoln as saying, America is the last best hope of earth. But what Lincoln actually said was America is the last best hope of mankind on earth. Right. This silent elimination of mankind speaks to the larger elimination of our past. And you can't claim the authority of the past while you're eliminating the past. So our new experiment is we're no longer trying to live up to the promise of the past. Right. That's the reality.
Yeah,
it is not the divided culture. It's a culture without the inheritance of the past.
Right. And it's interesting because I think that part of that culture of the past, Christianity, is a
Precisely.
root of what's really under attack here. And I don't know that people are going to appreciate how dark it's going to get for Christians in this country. Richard, you got to talk into this because people are going to be afraid. They don't know what to do. We saw the energy of those that maybe were so frustrated that they don't care if the whole thing burns down anymore because they felt that they were totally stolen from.
Let me be clear. The single most used phrase in the Bible is be not afraid. And we have to be not afraid. We cannot go into this with fear. We have to go into it with an absolute conviction that we are going to present our Christian selves, our best selves. And if people don't like it, they don't like it. But we have to be willing to take, certain amount of abuse and maybe a lot of abuse by standing for Christ and being our Christian selves. That is the tool that God will bring renewal through. And running away from it will leave us exactly where we are.
Well, we're not going to run away from it, but we are going to be meek and do all the other things that God does require of us in moments like this. Thank you. Thank you all three for being here with me and helping us sort through the promises made, the promises kept, but as well as where we're going to go next. I thank you for being with us, and I'll be right back after this. For watching Cure America with Star Parker, and I hope that you will continue to think with me every week as we dive into national issues of culture, race, and poverty that are in the headlines. Cure America with Star Parker is made possible by by the generosity of our Cure family of friends that contribute to our nonprofit umbrella organization, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, which is a policy institute based here in Washington, D.C. We're a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, so we welcome you to join us, join our family of friends, join our sponsors to help us expand our policy, media, and clergy programs to reach more folks to fight poverty and to restore dignity through messages of faith, freedom, and personal responsibility. I hope you also write me. Send me a note if you want to share your thoughts or any ideas. Now, may our good Lord bless you and keep you. May his light shine upon your life and upon the life of all those you love.